For more than half a century, you have been traveling to Central and Eastern Europe. I'm just curious how it started, how this ministry of Philadelphia Trust started.
Well, it wasn't initially the ministry of the Philadelphia Trust. It was actually the burden that my wife and I had that began the day that the Russians invaded Prague. We were involved in a prayer meeting that evening, and like many believers in UK, we were praying for our brothers and sisters in what was then Czechoslovakia. While we were praying, we were asking the question, what should we do? In reality, we were expecting that we would send a few parcels to Prague. That was the idea that we had. We realized that God was saying something to us, and we needed to be prepared to do whatever it was. And when we met for the third time, we all felt we should go. Now, it seemed a bit crazy. We didn't have a car. My wife was 5 months pregnant, and the wife of the other couple coming, she was 3 months pregnant. And it seemed ridiculous. In fact, our parents, particularly my wife's parents who are not believers, they just couldn't understand it at all. But we really put out 2 fleeces. Number one, we hadn't got a car. If we were going to go, we needed a car. And we also agreed that we would take the advice of a medic that we knew very well, who was a senior medic who could give us really good advice, whether it was possible to take the children. Well, both fleeces came back wet. Because, first of all, the medic said to us, as long as the children are breastfed, no problem to take them. The car was another issue, and that was quite amazing. My younger brother who came with us, he was on university vacation back in our hometown, and a brother said to him, "Peter, I've got a burden to lend you my car for the summer. I think God wants you to go somewhere." "Yes," said Peter. "Czechoslovakia." Well, the brother nearly fell through the floor, because in those days, very few people went through the Iron Curtain. But he said, "God's told me, so you've got my car." And so we set out in that car for Czechoslovakia. We had 2 addresses, one in Prague and one in a village not far from Prague. The more we travelled and prayed about it, we felt we ought to be going to the village near to Prague and not to Prague. Well, that was clearly divine guidance, because we discovered later that the person who lived in Prague was actually a secret policeman. The believers that we went to in the Czech Republic were in fact people who were involved in Bible distribution. And they had been praying for a long time, "Lord, please send us people that we can pray with and share with," because they couldn't tell the Czech Christians what they were doing, because they might well be confiding in a secret policeman. So they wanted someone to go to have fellowship with them. And in reality, it was us.
I understand that for Christian believers from Eastern Europe that were under communist regime, it was so important to have this contact with some other believers from our parts of the world where they had liberty. So that was really important, to feel that somebody cares for them, somebody prays for them, somebody visits them. I think that was a tremendous encouragement for them to be visited.
Yes, the initial stage of our ministry what was actually to meet up with believers and to have fellowship with them. In fact, the family that we first went to, who lived in a small village called Sazava, they had a summer house which they opened up for anyone to go and visit. So when we were there were usually believers from other parts of Czechoslovakia who were there too. And we had Bible studies every day, and we had fun and fellowship, I think I would describe it, together. We carried a small amount of money, small amount of Bibles and literature with us, but they said to us, don't bring big amounts because that could cause us trouble. We value you coming more than we value what you bring.
As far as I understand, there was a certain danger involved. The secret police kind of was following after what you are doing, watching. So what motivated you actually to go ahead and to continue visiting these brothers and continue the ministry?
Well, when we went, we could see how much they valued us going. I guess there was part of us who were prepared to take the risks. You know, we believed that God was in what we were doing, and we were happy to do it. We did have some interesting experiences with the secret police. We didn't actually call them the secret police, we called them our friends. And it was quite often when we were travelling down a road, somebody in the vehicle would say, "Oh, our friends are behind us." We had one quite amazing instance. We were travelling out, it was actually the third time that we went, and we had agreed with our friends that we would arrive at 12 o'clock midday. But we had terrible trouble on the journey, and as a result, we actually arrived at 12 o'clock midnight. Now, when it happened, we knew two things. Number one, we were very late. And number two, as we arrived in the village, we saw our friends pull in behind us, and they followed us all the way to the chalet where we were staying. After they had been there for about half an hour, they disappeared. We didn't understand the significance of that until in 1991, when everything had changed, we began sharing stories. And this old brother said, "Do you remember that day when our friends followed you to the chalet?" And we said, "Yes." Well, he said, "Let me tell you what actually happened." He said, "One day before, the secret police came to my house and said to me, 'We know you have a transport of Bibles coming from the West. We are going to catch you, and you and they will be in prison for a long time.'" Well, he knew we were coming, but there was no way he could get a message to us and stop us coming, so he just had to commit the whole thing into God's hand. As I said, we were 12 hours late because we had breakdowns on the road, and we actually arrived at exactly the time that the Bible transport was expected. Clearly, the secret police thought we were the Bible transport, and they waited for us to offload the Bibles, which of course didn't happen. What actually did happen is that 5 minutes after us, the Bible transport did arrive, and the brother in the house where we were staying met them, offloaded the Bibles in another chalet, and everybody escaped without any kind of problem. And it was an amazing experience for us to know that God was in control, and some of the lessons we didn't learn for 20 or 30 years.
When you are visiting different country, and especially where Christians are persecuted, of course, there is we have to admit, there is a fear that sometimes is boiling inside of us. When faith and fear is battling, how to make sure that faith is winning?
It's an interesting question. We only had a few incidents where things were somewhat difficult, I would say. The first time was actually in 1969. We wanted to go into East Germany. In those days, it was difficult to get a visa, but if you were camping, you could go in. So we went and we camped in 1969. We planned to meet up with some Christians, but that was prevented because when we camped, within just a couple of hours, the police arrived at our tent and they took us to the local police station. They asked us a host of questions and eventually let us go. But I have to tell you, it was a very frightening experience. We wondered what was happening. And I have to say, when they told us we could go, we went, and as fast as we could, we got to the border with West Germany, and we went through it. So yes, fear is a big issue on occasions, but the truth is that didn't in any way stand in the way of us going again, because we could see that God was in control, and we were quite happy to rest in that control. The reality is, it wasn't until 1990, when the wall came down, that we realized just how much God was in control. When we were able to share stories with those on the other side, we saw the amazing hand of God in so many ways.
So that means that there are no closed doors. All the time there are some creative ways to get into a country that is not welcoming Christians.
We should have been more creative in the West than we were. You know, I'm an educationalist, and I now realize that there are educational ways that I could have gone beyond the Iron Curtain long before I actually did. And I've also learned that my educational background is a very, very valuable tool, because I am using it now a great deal in Ukraine. Even though there are all the problems there, I can use it via Zoom and other ways to reach people. And I really do believe that we should be as creative as possible, use what we can to the glory of God. Yes, it was I think the biggest lesson I learned, that there are ways, even in closed countries, that we can serve God.
Although when you started visiting central and eastern countries of Europe, you didn't have a mission organization behind you, but Philadelphia Trust was formed later on. Maybe you can mention when was formed the Philadelphia Trust, and maybe you can share something about your values and your vision, and maybe current vision. What is your current vision of the mission organization that you represent?
In 1991, it became clear that there was huge need in a number of countries. And we contacted our fellow believers in the United Kingdom and said that we were going to be transporting aid into both Romania and Poland. Now, we had transported aid into Poland during the period of martial law in the early 80s. But on that occasion, to be honest, we used our local assembly bank account to do it. But when things got so much bigger and the income coming into the assembly was mostly for Central and Eastern Europe, my elder brethren said to me, "Brother Roger, I think you need to set up a charity." And so we set up this charity in 1991, and we called it the Philadelphia Trust. The concept was clear, that we are a trust that is bounded by the love of God. And in fact, our strapline was then serving by the love of God in Central and Eastern Europe. And that still is our motivation, to serve by the love of God in Central and Eastern Europe. So initially, we were very much an organization that was involved in carrying help in a small way. We were not a big organization at all, but we were a number of brothers working together to serve God. And we founded the trust so that basically we kept within British law as far as finance was concerned. But over the time of us carrying goods, particularly here into Romania, we got messages such as, brothers, we value your goods, but actually we value your ministry more than we value your goods. And in fact, I got the same message in Poland. The time for aid from you has gone. What we need is you to be involved in ministry. And so the Philadelphia Trust moved from being mainly an aid organization to being mainly an organization that was involved in children's camps, youth camps, Bible study weeks, and as far as I was concerned, I was also heavily involved in the Bible school in Poland and also helping with the Bible school in Hungary. We also became aware that the fact that we speak English as mother tongue is a gift that God has given us. We didn't deserve it, God gave it to us. And it is a tool that we can use in evangelism. And so we have run a number of English-speaking camps, and we have used the skill that God has given us in that way. In 2003, I was challenged to go to Ukraine. Now, I have to say to you, I had decided at that time I was already doing enough. And actually, to go to Ukraine was beyond what I had planned to do. But there was a very persuasive brother there who said to me, Roger, you need to come. So I said to him, why? He said, I'll tell you. You are an older brother. I'm obviously a bit older now. But you are an older brother who has experienced what it's like living in a Western culture. We now have a Western culture in Ukraine, and our older brothers cannot help the younger brothers because they've got no experience of that culture. He said, we need people like you to come and help us. So I agreed to go once. Well, when I went there and spoke with a large number of younger men, I could see they needed the help and advice of an older man. And so began a ministry in Ukraine, which has developed in two ways. Number one, I have been very often involved in Bible teaching sessions looking at serious issues that affect young people, such as new atheism, and issues about the confidence we can have in the scriptures and things like that. But on top of that, I was asked by Christians in education to run education sessions in schools. And I was also asked to bring medics out with me who could run medical sessions. And that has been very much a ministry that we have been involved in, using professional skills as a tool for evangelism. So that's where the Philadelphia Trust is, I guess, at this moment. Where the future lies is ultimately in God's hand. But we believe we have a responsibility to train others to follow in the footsteps that we have taken. We recognize that a sensitive role in Bible teaching is one that we can fulfill, but I want to emphasize it's a sensitive role. You know, there is a danger that those of us who come from a Western culture think we know it all, but we don't. There's also the danger that we think we should be teaching all our Central and Eastern European brothers what they should be teaching. That's not right either. But we do believe very strongly that we can work in partnership with our brothers, and that's very much something we want to hand on to the next generation. Because if I'm honest, anyone who comes to work with us initially is a little bit imperialistic in their mentality. And we have to work with them and say, brothers, we are working together for the work of God. And we point to many examples, particularly in the book of Acts, where people from totally different cultures work together for the glory of God. And we believe that's where we should be.
Indeed, this lesson of partnership, I think, has to be imprinted in our minds and hearts strongly, because actually that's the kingdom of God. That's the ministry we are supposed to do. We're supposed to do in partnership. And in this, indeed, there is much encouragement when we, from the Central or Eastern Europe, working together with brothers from the Western Europe, and together we're just contributing to the extension of the Lord's kingdom. In the end of our interview, because we live in the last days, let me say, of the last days of history, we do believe that the Lord's return is imminent. The Lord will return and will rapture his church. What would be your advice for Romanian young believers, for brethren assemblies in Romania? From your experience working in this part of Europe, what would you expect Romanian brethren assemblies, how they are supposed to get involved in a ministry in this, as I said, in these last days of history?
Well, in reality, I think it's the same message for Romania as it is for Wales. You know, our responsibility, wherever we are, is to serve God. Now, I also think it's very important that we are careful that we don't have a one idea about how we can serve God. You know, the reality is, if you look at the first century situation, God used quite unusual people to do his work. You know, our Lord chose 12 people who originated from Galilee, which was the area that the Jews did not like, or where they looked down on them. So God used people from an area where people were not respected. But God used them because they were prepared to put their hand into the hand of God. And then God raised up people like the Apostle Paul and Barnabas and so on, very different people from different cultures to be involved in service for him. Now, some of the people that God raised up were people involved in full-time ministry. But then there were other quite remarkable servants of God who were, for example, tent makers. You know, Aquila and Priscilla, we never read of them being full-time servants of God. But what we do read about them was they were heavily involved in service from the beginning of our introduction to them to the end. And so I think it's really important that we say to people, every one of us is a servant of God. Every one of us needs to do what God tells us to do. And every one of us should use the skills that God has given us. You know, I think Luke is a phenomenal example. He was an amazing historian and clearly an amazing doctor. But actually, we know so little about him because he was more concerned about serving the kingdom than he was about serving Luke. And I think that's what would be my message. Let's all be really engaged in serving the kingdom.
Thank you, Brother Roger, for your valuable thoughts and for encouragement. And we indeed value so much your input in this part of the world, of Europe. So may the Lord strengthen you and bless Philadelphia Trust and the ministry that you do for the Lord's glory.